Hi, John Freeman here. About a year ago, I began publishing the first of my 16 rules for investing in software-based businesses. This video corresponds to rule number 3, called the second half of the chessboard. In this video, I will retell my version of the allegory of the Emperor of India and the inventor of chess, show how that allegory relates to Moore's law, which is the primary driver of change and growth in software, and then, using the visual construct of the chessboard, forecast where we think Moore's law is going. The allegory of the Emperor of India and the inventor of chess has been used many times to impart an understanding of the impact of compounding exponential growth over time. The kind of growth seen in Moore's law, which we describe in rule number 2. Giving credit where credit is due, Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee were among the first to employ this allegorical comparison to the legend of the chessboard with Moore's law in their excellent book, Race Against the Machine. So according to the legend, the Emperor of India was so impressed by the game of chess, he granted the game's inventor any reward she wished. The woman replied, "I'm a simple woman. Give me 1 grain of rice for the first square of the chessboard, 2 grains for the second square, 4 grains for the third square, and so on for all 64 squares of the chessboard." So the last square of the first row of the chessboard only has 128 grains of rice. That easily fits into the palm of a hand. The last square of the second row comes out to 32,768 grains of rice, which is only about a ½ kilogram bag of rice. So skipping ahead to the last square on the third row, we get to 2 large wheelbarrows of rice after 8 more doublings. So even now, the emperor is not particularly concerned. For the last square on the fourth row, this is the last square of the first half of the chessboard. We get to now a significant amount, about 30 tons, which is about a 1-year yield for a small mid-sized farm. But still, the emperor is not particularly concerned. So 8 more doublings on the second half of the chessboard, and now he's getting nervous, right? We're at a ½ trillion grains of rice, about 7,000 tons, or about the annual yield for an average-sized district during, I guess, the olden days. So going to the 8 more doublings to the last square on the 6th row, as you can kind of probably figure out here, the amounts are really getting pretty crazy. This amount, about 140 trillion grains, 1.8 million tons. It's about the same as the 2015 yield for the Indian state of Gujarat. So on the last square of the 7th row, we're at 36 quadrillion grains of rice, which is about 500 million tons, which is approximately what the global yield was, the entire global yield in 2020. So on the last 64th square of the chessboard, this is when the amounts kind of get crazy, really crazy. It comes out to 9.2 quintillion rice grains. And if you laid them end to end, they would actually stretch from Earth to our nearest star, which is Alpha Centauri, and back. So, that's more rice than human beings have ever produced, right? So in one of the versions, I guess the emperor has the inventor of chess beheaded because he's so angry that, he got ripped off. In ours, I don't know, maybe we have a little more optimistic view, more of what goes on. Maybe the inventor of chess, she takes the emperor out and, I don't know, institutes a more enlightened form of government or something like that. The point is there are 2 real takeaways here from this allegory. One is that human beings are not very good at determining and forecasting the ultimate impact of compounding nonlinear phenomenon, right? We usually undershoot it. The second thing is that the first half of any sort of exponential compounding phenomenon like this often seems linear, and the numbers don't get really crazy. The impact doesn't, really sort of surprise us and astound us until the second half of the chessboard. And I think, we're starting to see that with technology and with software specifically. So Ray Kurzweil, who's a computer scientist and the author of what I think is a really great thought-provoking book on the progression of technology and information. The book is called "The Singularity is Near." He's written some other stuff which is really good too, but here's a quote from him that I think really captures this phenomenon, and that is, quote, "Our intuition about the future is linear, but the reality of information technology is exponential, and that makes a profound difference. If I take 30 steps linearly, I get to 30. If I take 30 steps exponentially, I get to a billion." So the same feels true with Moore's law, right? Like the seemingly normal progression of rice volumes on the first half of the chessboard, there's some computational tasks that, just seemed way not possible, not even in the realm of possibility. And then, all of a sudden they're not, right? You think you owe 2 wheelbarrows of rice or something in that ballpark, and you double that a bunch more times, and all of a sudden you own a rice pile the size of Mount Everest, right? That's kind of what Moore's law has felt like, I think. The compounding, geometric growth in computing capacity per unit costs crosses these thresholds, right, for previously unfeasible things and what we can do with that exponentially greater computing capacity, what software can do specifically with that exponentially greater computing capacity, or the Moore's law corollary, which is a fixed amount of computing capacity per unit area at a fraction of the cost and that threshold, crosses thresholds and shocks us also over and over again, both Moore's law and its corollary on the cost side, if you hold computing capacity constant. So then, that, because that allows, whatever that software application to become, trivial, cheap, and ubiquitous, right? And that has a tremendous amount of value in and of itself. A wirelessly networked computer and, in every pocket and on every wrist, right? I think some people, many people, institutional investors included, are continuously caught by surprise by the derivative impact of what we, all can agree is an exponential phenomenon. Even that, while it's difficult to grasp, it can be extrapolated into the future. So in their book, Brynjolfsson and McAfee remarked that if the doubling of computer capacity driven by Moore's law were mapped onto a chessboard, like grains of rice promised to the inventor of chess, with the year of the first commercially available transistor being 1954, that's set to square one, then we just entered the, not that long ago, the second half of the chessboard in 2013. So obviously this second half of the chessboard is a metaphor, but I think it neatly summarizes sort of our conviction in the tremendous upside potential ahead. In addition, I think it encapsulates our belief that among all public equities, those of software-based businesses fueled by Moore's law hold the greatest potential to outperform the overall equity market, with their long-term potential being much greater than any single sector. So we decided to go ahead and do that historical mapping ourselves, that historical mapping of Moore's law onto the chessboard, and then extrapolate it going forward into the future. So we set the first square on the chessboard to 1954, which was the first year of the year of the first commercially available transistor. And then in the subsequent square, we put the year that transistor density doubling occurred. To date, by far the greatest driver of Moore's law of the cost constant exponential growth in transistor density has been due to shrink, specifically horizontal shrink, that is making the transistors and their interconnections smaller and smaller, thus fitting more and more of them on the surface area first of a circuit board during the 1950s, then the integrated circuit or chip beginning in the early 60s, which could contain circuits with many transistors patterned and etched all at once on a single rectangular piece of silicon oxide, aka the chip. Right. Soon after that, in 1966, Gordon Moore made his famous predictive observation, later to be called Moore's law. In either case, circuit board or integrated circuit, we denote horizontal shrink here with this big TR arrow, big TR arrow, little TR symbol you see here. So here's the first row of the chessboard, which takes us through 1964, which is the year of the first commercially available integrated circuit or chip that featured 120 transistors, about 8 shy of what you would expect. And see in the 50s here in the green, that's the transistors. You could literally see them and put them on a circuit board, and obviously build computers out of them, which they did. But they were also just a couple of transistors could be used and were used to make the first battery-powered portable radios. They were called transistor radios. So here we had a color coding scheme corresponding to what we call the Moore's rate, which is the annual. That's just the annual cost constant increase in transistor density, expressed as TR per millimeter squared per dollar, right? Which is a rough proxy for computing capacity available in a given form factor per unit cost. For the purposes of both, this history and extrapolation, we're going to express the Moore's rate in terms of doubling time, much in the same way that people talk about the rate of cell division in biology. So just through just about 1975, when microprocessors moved from having, say, thousands to tens of thousands of transistors during, from 64 to 75 roughly, the Moore's rate really from 54 until 1975 was 18 months, and then it slowed to 2 years, which is a pace it held until about 2013. So here we see we've we mapped it out. We got a little bit of a different year. We got 2011 rather than 2013 as the first year of the second half of the chessboard. The point is, we're on the second half of the chessboard where ostensibly things start to really surprise us. So while horizontal shrink has been the primary driver of Moore's law, there is a second contributing driver, though we haven't really seen its impact for about 2 decades now. But that's the increasing the wafer size, the size of the silicon wafer on which chips are patterned and from which they are cut and extracted. So increasing wafer sizes definitely contributed to the decline in per transistor cost, and we denote that here with the icon with the wafer arrow, bigger wafer circled in red here. So here we show Moore's law slowing to the 2.5-year doubling pace that occurred in 2014 and is still, on track to occur through 2024. Here you see the 2010s. You got about 10 million transistors per square millimeter, and in the 2020s, we're already now at 1 billion or more transistors per square millimeter. So next, we introduce what we see happening right now. What I see actually is an acceleration of Moore's law as it transitions from horizontal shrink to vertical shrink, that is from 2D planar chips to 3D circuit structures. We're already seeing this shift from horizontal to vertical shrink from the bottom up in NAND flash with the doubling of data storing layers, and also from the top down with these stacked interconnected chips, so-called 3D ICs. Sometimes they have 4, 8, and now sometimes 16, up to 16 individual chips, usually interleaved with memory and data storage, CPUs, GPUs, that kind of thing, often used in the servers in these massive hyperscale data centers run by the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, and so forth. Anyway, for our projections, we denote a doubling of transistor density in the vertical direction, what we call vertical shrink, with this icon of 1 chip, an arrow, and then 2 chips stacked. So here's my full forecast for Moore's law. While they're not they're not produced in large commercial volumes, there are 8 chip stacks, 3D cubes, 3D ICs for specific applications. I mean, do you think the industry is going to be satisfied with 8? Of course not. It's going to go to 16 and 32s and 64. The economics are different than horizontal shrink, no doubt. But if you think the leading edge being a 3D chip that consolidates multiple servers, then multiple racks of servers, then voila, you got today's AWS hyperscale data center fits in your pocket in 2040, right? I think vertical shrink will proceed faster than horizontal shrink because now we don't have any of the engineering. We've seen the movie before, and we don't have the engineering challenges of increasingly smaller scales. All we have is applying what we've already learned, about smaller scales in the vertical direction, right? Right now with 3D ICs, we're talking about scales in the millimeter range in the vertical direction, not nanometers, which we've already seen in the horizontal direction. So yeah, I think 3D shrink will accelerate Moore's law, and more specifically, will accelerate the Moore's rate. We see the Moore's rate, accelerating into the 30s. Driven mostly by vertical shrink, although horizontal shrink still contributes to transistor density, I think, for a while. So, what we're going to have, by 2026, I've got 100 million transistors per cubic millimeter, and then 10 billion by 2032, 1 trillion by 2040, and 100 trillion by 2060. I mean, obviously, this is this is a guess, but I do think that we're in the ballpark. And what this ends up being is just a tremendous amount, so much larger space for software to take up and to do and to produce value, to generate value. And I think that's really actually underappreciated, with if you look at software companies' valuations right now, even though of course there's going to be a Darwinian winnowing of those winners, of those companies, but the winners will be producing and generating several times more value than they do today. And I think that's why we are so bullish on software right now. Thank you.